Shalom. Today we'll talk about recent reports from Egypt. Then, based on the recent IAF strikes in Syria against Turkey and Turkey's publishing of Israeli targets that it could strike, we will look into a potential war between Israel and Turkey, and then an update on the UN summit French-Saudi initiative. It's finally here. Egypt. In the recent Doha summit last week, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi strongly criticized recent Israeli actions and explicitly referred to Israel, reminder, Israel and Egypt have a peace treaty and have had it for many years, as an enemy, saying that Arab and Islamic states must change their posture so the enemy understands the region's resolve. He said Israeli strikes, including the strike that hit sites in Doha, are undermining any prospect for future peace agreements, threaten regional security, and risk creating displacement and a humanitarian catastrophe, and therefore cannot be accepted. This is unusually blunt language from Sisi, the first time in decades he has publicly used wording like enemy, and it is a hardening of tone tied to recent strikes and broader regional pressure. In a recent CNN interview, Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abed al-Ati said that the deportation of Gazans to Egypt is a national threat to Egypt, and more so, that Israel is not a peace partner. While he avoided answering whether such a deportation would endanger the peace treaty itself with Israel, he emphasized the great national threat of such a move. Egypt will not participate in such a move, which would end the idea of a Palestinian country permanently. Praise God, I say. Egypt's defense minister, Abdel Majid Sakar, stressed that recent moves are meant to be ready to confront any development on the ground. These moves are, of course, military buildup, and that efforts to undermine Egypt's borders will be stopped. ABC News reported that for the first time in 13 years, Turkey and Egypt will hold joint naval drills this week, dubbed Friendship Sea, which indicates a continued warming of relations between the two countries that both vie for hegemony in the Middle East. Along with Iran and Saudi Arabia, they wish to be seen as the leaders of the Arab and Muslim world. Relationships soured after the 2013 Arab Spring, in which the current dictator of Egypt, Sisi, ousted the elected president Musri, head of the Muslim Brotherhood, an organization outlawed in Egypt and most of the Middle East, but backed by Turkey. Additional tension between the countries is due to their opposing allies in the Libyan conflict. Yet, in 2023, they decided to try to repair the relationship and have taken steps to do so, such as reappointing ambassadors and visits between both leaders. Media outlet MEM, Middle East Monitor, reported on September 16th that Egypt deployed the Chinese equivalent of the Russian S-400, the HQ-9B, a long-range air defense system in the Sinai, a move that highlighted the concerns in Israel over a possible military escalation. Walla News reported that Egypt's official public relations office released a public statement on Sunday morning in response to the allegations of illegal buildup of Egyptian forces in the Sinai. It emphasized that the forces in the Sinai are to protect Egypt's borders and is pre-arranged with the relevant parties regarding the peace treaty, and that Egypt is fully committed to the peace treaty and have never broken any alliance or treaty in history. The Lebanese paper Al-Akhbar, which is affiliated with Hezbollah, reported from Egyptian sources that Egypt is preparing for waves of immigration from Gaza, with orders not to open fire on any Gazan approaching the border, but also with awareness that such a mass immigration is a direct threat to Egypt, and that they will be doubling their troops in the Sinai, as well as moving heavy artillery and warplanes to the area. Now let's move on a bit to Turkey. Let's talk about the military confrontation between Turkey and Israel, why it's unlikely, and if it happens, would Israel come out on top? Turkey has one of the strongest armies in the Middle East. It is superior to Israel in numbers, tanks, artillery, strategic depth, and it has a navy that is many times larger than Israel's. Israel, however, possesses a much superior air force and enjoys technological and intelligence advantages, including satellite reconnaissance and cyber. It has multi-layered defensive systems that make any attempt to strike targets more complex and difficult. Israel and Turkey do not share a land border, so the relevant power here is the Air Force, interception defense systems, and the maritime arena. Now, why is a broad confrontation between the two countries unlikely? On the one hand, Turkey hosts the Hamas command that launches attacks into Israel. Therefore, it's only a matter of time before Israel tries to strike Hamas personnel on Turkish soil, similar to the strike on Qatar. On the other hand, Turkey is a NATO member. Hence, it's likely Israel will avoid a direct strike on Turkey, like the operation in Qatar. Activity of this kind, if it occurs, will be more targeted. For example, assassinations of scientists in Iran. In fact, the NATO membership may restrain Turkey from a military adventure, since NATO is a defensive alliance, not one that permits Turkey to drag other countries into its own military adventures. The US will apply heavy pressure on both countries to prevent a clash, and if that fails, it will likely lean towards Israel. The mere fact that Erdogan knows all of this will prevent him from entering an adventure he would be defeated in. That doesn't mean he won't threaten. But in any case, let's consider why local clashes could occur. The fact that Turkey is a refuge for senior Hamas figures who carry out attacks in Israel raises the possibility of an almost certain future friction. An Israeli operation, if successful, and certainly if agents are caught, similar to the failed operation in Jordan in 1997, could escalate tensions to a real confrontation. A flotilla to Gaza that ends with Turkish casualties like the Mavi Marmara could also cause the situation to explode. And of course, direct clashes between Israeli and Turkish forces in Syria. Now, suppose such a situation breaks out. What would happen? Any military clash between the countries would be accompanied by massive US pressure on both sides to end it, and therefore it would be expected to be short. Turkey might launch UAVs, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles at targets in Israel, based on the target bank that it published a few days ago. But the multi-layered defense system of Israel should intercept most of them. Its capability in this field is not greater than Iran's. That is, the Turkish missile capability is not greater, but it might be more accurate. Turkey will not send manned aircraft to attack Israel simply because they would have difficulty reaching their targets. And if they did arrive, they would face the multi-layered defense and an air force that is technologically superior and has recent combat experience. Now, in the maritime arena, Turkey has a clear advantage. It dominates numerically, but it would sustain heavy losses due to the Israeli air superiority. There could be hits on trade routes, but a full siege is not expected. On the other hand, Israel is expected to blind radar and air defense systems based on the Russian S-400 and other Russian-Chinese systems. Israel has already faced those systems in Iran and would achieve air superiority within a short time. And that would allow strikes on almost any strategic target on Turkish bases, ports, air bases, symbolic centers of power, similar to what we saw in Iran once the skies were under Israeli control. There is a danger, though, if Turkey sends armored divisions through Syria. But that would be a long distance, easy to detect, and exposed to air attacks, so it's unlikely that they would, and if they would, it would probably be destroyed. Now, Turkey, as mentioned before, has the advantage of strategic depth and the capability to sustain a prolonged conflict. Turkey is much larger than Israel. Therefore, the longer the conflict lasts, the more it could wear down Israel's military and economy. But, for the reason mentioned, such a conflict is expected to be short. Now, a few additional points. We spoke about Turkey, but not about the possibility of cooperation with Egypt, which we just spoke about a moment ago. In that case, we must remember that Israel is not alone. We have also proven cooperation with the United States, for example, in the war with Iran. And Turkish cooperation with Egypt would invite even more U.S. intervention. And that's not counting the fact that Egypt's military depends on the U.S. for spare parts and Western ammunition for its forces. Also, the Egyptian budget is based on support by the United States. Another thing to point out is that the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt is the greatest threat to the Egyptian regime. Therefore, I think there's a gap between what is being shown outwardly and the opposing interests within the Arab world. Turkey's air defense systems are ones that Israel faced successfully in the Iran war, and Israel did not lose a single aircraft. This includes the S-300, the S-400, and other systems. They also have a domestic industry, but its effect has not yet been proven in combat. Another important thing to remember is Israeli intelligence, which we've seen in the last 2 years has infiltrated deeply and very swiftly eliminated our enemies, be it Hezbollah or Iran. It took us just 2 weeks to defeat Iran and just a couple of months to destroy Hezbollah's leadership. Now, I'm not trying to belittle the Turks, but Israel has a tendency to magnify our enemies, such as Hezbollah, and diminish ourselves. And that is what I'm going against. So, I hope that this summary of the situation will help you sleep better at night. If Erdogan believed that he could successfully embark on a military adventure against Israel, he probably would have already done it. But even an extreme ruler understands pretty much everything that I said here. So he will continue to threaten and complain, but it will probably end there. Let's move on to the French-Saudi Peace Initiative, or Recognition of Palestine Initiative, that's coming right up. So, there is this initiative, a diplomatic push this year to revive the two-state solution by encouraging groups of friendly Western and like-minded states to recognize a Palestinian state at the UN. These efforts have gained visible momentum. France announced recognition plans, and several Anglo and smaller European countries have signaled they would follow, while a broader UN-level declaration tied to the initiative helped to build political pressure behind the move. At the same time, several major European partners declined to join the front. Key players such as Germany and Italy publicly held back, preferring negotiated solutions and warning that premature unilateral recognition could be counterproductive. In practice, therefore, the coalition supporting recognition is mixed. Most states that have publicly committed to recognition have attached conditions. The common stipulations are exclusion of Hamas from any future governing arrangement, clear guarantees about Palestinian Authority reform, including elections and institutional changes, and linkage to the release of hostages and a reduction in violence. Some governments have signaled that they will recognize politically first, but delay bilateral steps such as embassy openings until conditions are met. This cautious approach reflects Western concerns about rewarding armed groups and the desire to shape the post-conflict political architecture in Gaza and the West Bank. Many Arab states have either welcomed the initiative, and co-sponsors like Saudi Arabia and supportive actors such as Egypt have publicly backed this diplomatic track. Overall, the initiative has created real momentum, but with significant caveats: conditionality from many prospective recognizers, public Israeli deterrent rhetoric, and an active U.S. effort to manage escalation. The likely near-term outcome is political pressure and diplomatic friction rather than a dramatic shift on the ground. Though the situation remains sensitive to Israeli domestic choices and to whether recognition is matched by concrete changes in Palestinian governance. The bottom line is that the next few days will be noisy and public on both sides of this, but without too many practical steps on the ground. Now, tomorrow is Rosh Hashanah evening. The Jewish New Year will start. It is a time to remember all the good that our Lord has given us this past year and give thanks and gratitude to Him. So let's conclude with the Shehechianu blessing that Jews say whenever a new season comes, a holiday, a new fruit, or a life change. It will be prayed tomorrow at the Rosh Hashanah dinner. And it goes as following. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has kept us alive, sustained us, and brought us to this season. Happy New Year, Shana Tova.